Croeso cynnes chi gyd, a warm welcome to the Horizon stage. If you've just arrived, welcome. Hope you're enjoying yourself and settling in. If you've been here all morning so far, hopefully you're enjoying yourselves here at Wales Tech Week. We do encourage all of you to download the app if you haven't yet. Give me a nod if you downloaded the app. Okay, not enough of you, okay, only about 2 or 3 there. Download the app, we're keen for you to register on it as well so we can get the data from that as well. Also, the floor plan is fantastic. There's other stages upstairs for those of you who haven't been upstairs yet, and also kind of a schedule for the whole next 3 days. So please get involved with the apps. It's a simple one, Wales Tech Week. It's there. You can download it immediately to your phones. Okay, we've got another fascinating panel to crack on with right now. It's called People First Cybersecurity, Human Expertise Meets Advanced Tech. Annabel Berry will lead this one, so please give her and the panel a warm welcome. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Bore da pawb, thank you for coming. Croeso cynnes i'r session yma. A very warm welcome to this session to all of you. There are 3 panelists we have actually on the stage today. We have one panelist, as you'll see on the screen, so welcome Amanda, if you can hear me. Give us a wave.
Hi.
Lovely, great stuff. My name's Annabel Berry. I'm the founder of an organization called Leading Cyber. So I'm a part of the industry that very much focuses on people in the sector. So this session today is going to be a fascinating chat. It's around people first cybersecurity. So looking at human-centric, human expertise meeting advanced technology. So it's how we keep people at the very heart of some of the systems and technologies that we're deploying, specifically around where we're deploying advanced tech and emerging tech and things like that, and some of the complexities, but also actually very much about some of the challenges that we're finding today with the existing tech that we've already deployed and are continuing to deploy in our organizations and systems. So I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves to you one at a time. So we start with you, Joanna.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Joanna Syrda. I am an academic from University of Bath studying economics of cybersecurity and digital privacy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Barry Kirby. I'm the managing director of a company called K-Sharp, just up the road in Carmarthen. And we're human factors practitioners looking at the implementation of the human aspects within all sorts of products, largely in the defence sector. And for this session, I'm really keen to understand and share the work that we do in putting a human front on the cybersecurity of all types of products.
Hi guys, my name is Rita and I work as a cybersecurity change lead in Admiral, where I lead AI and cybersecurity initiatives. Happy to be here today.
And over to you, Amanda.
Hi, I'm Amanda Widdowson. Very sorry, I'd love to have been there today, but it was circumstances outside my control. I'm the head of human factors and user experience for Thales UK.
Lovely, great stuff. So we're going to dive in. First of all, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about actually what are some of the core challenges that we see in doing this. Why is this something that we're still talking about after all this time? We've been talking about people in cybersecurity for as long as I can remember. I've been in the industry for a really long time now, and it's continued to be a topic that we talk about at conferences, and we still are today. We haven't sorted the problem out yet, so maybe we can in the next 42 minutes or so. But Amanda, I'm going to come to you first of all. Obviously, you've written a book on this subject. So from a human factors perspective, what is the single biggest barrier or system level flaw that you most frequently see when creating conditions for people to fail at security from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, definitely what I have seen is as the biggest failure is probably people not reporting when they've been victim to a cyber attack, like a phishing email. So an email that contains malicious software that a person might, they might click on a link or an attachment and inadvertently give away information that could compromise the organization. Now, they're not reporting it for a number of reasons, but the biggest one that I have seen is fear of blame. They're a bit embarrassed. They don't want to get blamed for submitting that information, for clicking that link that they shouldn't. And that is dangerous because we can't manage those incidents if we don't know about them, right? Another reason as well could be that, people just, it's just too difficult to report the incident. You might think, oh, what was that security address I was meant to contact when I, when I'd experienced an incident. So, it's about making it maybe easy for people to report incidents when they occur. And another reason is apathy. They maybe just aren't aware of the impact of them failing in that security, failing to report that incident. How does that affect the organization? So it might be they just don't appreciate that. So that has a lot to do with awareness as well.
I mean, sticking with that point, Amanda, talking about obviously user engagement, really, Barry, kind of maybe coming to you from a human-centered design perspective, what should the security teams be doing in terms of talking to people outside of security and IT, and how, really, crucially? What's your view on that?
So really, a lot of the problems we face at the moment is because a lot of the software that we have for security is seen as one-stop solution. We'll buy this in, we'll make it work. However, what we need to be doing is talking to our users, not just the IT team, as you say. It's the talking to everybody who has contact with the system. And we can do this through a number of routes. We've got fancy terms like contextual inquiry and things like that. But fundamentally, it's about talking to them, looking at what your staff do on a day-to-day basis and how they do it. Because really, our main ambition should be to make our software, our security elements, as frictionless as possible. Because as soon as you have to do something extra to maintain security, that's not productivity. And so you're having to do stuff outside of the day job just to keep things safe. So if we can actually talk to the teams in the first place, and it doesn't have to be clever, it is simply having a conversation about what it is that people do and how they do it, and then use that as the basis for any systems that you're developing.
Rita, coming to you, this is a good point for you to step in. I think from a change perspective within the organization, if we talk about organizational buy-in, I mean, what are the types of things that we can do to make sure that people are motivated to enforce and engage with things? And where do things get stuck for you within an organization? Where do those tend to get?
Thank you. That's a really good question. I think different places things can get stuck from, for example, not selecting the right tool with the users in mind. But then also there's also the middle level management. And I think the reason is because they are uniquely positioned and they always have sort of pressure from top management to deliver business results, but then they also have to deal with teams they are managing who often perceive security practices as a barrier to productivity. So I think that what we can do is to empower the middle level of managers, middle level managers, and one way we could do this is, for example, building capability, trying to explain security to them in the business language they understand already. So, for example, things like customer trust, you translate it to them like security practices ensures that we maintain our reputation, and then also it helps with customer relationship. It can also come from a perspective of business continuity, that security practices ensures that there are no business disruptions. Or you can also look at even from the lens of teams, encourage teams to let them understand or show them that security practices is more of an enabler than a barrier. So if we look at it from that approach, we can now empower the middle level management, which we could actually change from being where we often have these challenges to be the biggest advocates for security culture change. But also I think one thing that is important if you want to drive change, and that is leadership buy-in. Middle management, they need to be confident in knowing that if they want to drive security change in an organization, I mean, you will meet resistance, regardless of how you look at it. At some point, you will meet blockers, you will meet challenges, but they need to be confident and know that they have the backing of a leadership unequivocally. And this is because when you have strong leaders in cybersecurity, they help ensure that cybersecurity practices is not just siloed to IT teams, that is a shared responsibility across organizations. So we can actually change the middle level, which is often where initiatives fail, as the biggest drivers for security change in organizations.
Thanks, Rita. So, I mean, we've only got 45 minutes, so we don't have loads of time to kind of delve deeply into this, and we could spend probably another 45 minutes talking about this area on its own. But we've talked a lot initially about this notion of cultural impact, that basically it makes a difference about getting people at the heart of security, about communicating, about getting leadership buy-in and sponsorship. And I don't mean just within the cybersecurity team, but really critically leadership buy-in from the top of the organization if we can. And we've talked about user engagement. And I've heard Sean John, I don't know if any of you have seen Sean presenting, but Sean John refers to this as digital empathy, which I love, primarily because it's got the word empathy in it. And there's obviously been a lot of talk globally about empathy recently, and I'm a big advocate for it. So, but let's talk about money, Joanna. So we've gone from empathy to money. What extent does behavioral bias cause organizations or execs to consistently underinvest in proactive security? I mean, what are the things that we can encourage or help? What's the best economic nudge we can give to organizations that they can start to look at actually what investment do they need to be able to do to make people at the heart of what we do, which effectively makes things more effective? So.
Absolutely, thank you for that. And I think it nicely ties to your point. I think we've been talking about users as risk for a long time. I think we should think about users as partners, but also understand them with that digital empathy. So what does behavioral economics can tell us about users? And I think I'm going to talk a lot about things practitioners already know about. But when we think about whether it's a decision maker or a user, present bias, right? I prefer convenience today than avoiding harms in the future. We know this, right? Look at the savings rates in most countries. Then, we have bounded rationality, like people are beautifully and predictably irrational, and cognitive overload, right? If something is too much, I'm going to follow the path of the least resistance. And then we have loss aversion, which is, to me, still fantastically interesting bit. We are more harmed by a loss than happy of a reward. So, in terms of security, we can sometimes frame things to users in terms of expected losses. You don't want to drive security by fear, but you can quantify things to people in the way that it impacts their decision-making. You have social norms that I'm super interested in. You don't always have to regulate things out of existence. You can think that we are communities and we want to belong and follow rules that are upheld by the rest of us. So recently, and we have not published this yet, we're working on this, but we ran this experiment with your CEOs and CISOs and such across a couple of sectors, and we did this A/B testing where one got like a control message around work-life balance, and the other one was something around the negative and positive externalities that come with security. And if in the sector, people care about this beyond compliance. And we thought that maybe if we say that these are your industry standards in this message, people will think, oh, maybe we should be doing more. Totally not. Actually, they said, the A test group, that they're doing a lot already, more than the B test, and there was no call to action at all. So I would say, we know a lot in theory, but I think the beauty is in the details and the implementation, in the phrasing, in the approach. So that's one. But also, all of those decisions are made by organizations that are bundles of people with different roles and responsibilities and objective functions. So the experiment too had no impact on the CISOs or IT people because they have knowledge saturation. They don't need to be impacted by a small thing, but it had a big impact on the CEOs in their responses. So the typical conflict between a CEO and a CISO and then the implementation team and then the productivity team, I think we should just get on the same page and understand that we might have different objectives. So when we disagree in an organization about investment, it's not that we don't think security is important. It's just not part of my job description.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on now from obviously kind of talking a little bit about what are the core things that have got in the way. So we've talked about organizational root causes, economics, organizational buy-in, user engagement. Let's kind of move on to kind of looking at what are the things that we can do. So how can we start looking at and designing systems that augment human expertise and also try and manage some of this friction that we're all very used to and that is commonly happens and is inevitable that will happen, to your point, Joanna. Rita, coming to you. So every new policy and security tool can and usually does create some sort of friction. So in your experience, in your role that you're doing, what kind of strategies do you have for managing that resistance? And how do you roll out effectively so that it enhances both the security and productivity, which is that kind of, that goal, that holy grail?
Thank you. That's another really, really good question. I'm going to piggy off back of what Barry said earlier about speaking to users before buying a solution or before acquiring a solution. But let's just assume, to answer your question, let's just assume that has been taken care of, and your planning has been also taken care of. And by planning, I mean who needs to be involved, the right stakeholders, clear roles and responsibilities, requirements all nailed down. So let's just assume that all of that is in place. And then let's go to implementation. So in terms of implementation, communication is really important. You need to bring the people that you're trying to change along. So the first thing I'd say is communicate right. You want to communicate what the problem is, and you want to communicate how the solution will help address that problem. And then also the role, if it is in an organization or even if it is in a small group, what role they play. Would they play an active role, supportive role? Let them have clear understanding of the why. Because when they understand why a particular initiative or change is coming, then it will lower the friction and then lower the barrier. But then again, I think the next thing you need to do is to be sure that you are implementing in phases. If it is a complex tool, you want to start with pilot groups, run a small analysis with the groups. Let it serve as a litmus test for you, because that is where you get quicker feedback, improvement, and then when you eventually do your wider rollout, the early adopters are going to become advocates. I mean, nothing sells a tool more than someone saying, I actually used it and I really liked it. Like, that is half of the friction or half of the resistance nailed down, right? So you want to be able to do that, and phase rollout is a good way to go. Another thing I think that is important is embrace the rejection or resistance or whatever it is. Just take it heads on, understand what the challenges are, and if that happens at the early stage, it is always easier to manage the friction or easier to manage the resistance. Another thing that I think is important, again, for long term is resolution part, because there will be problems, there will be challenges, but you want to make it easier for people to get support, and want to also fashion it in a way or build your process flow in a way that it doesn't necessarily or disrupt daily activities, because if that happens, then it threatens long-term usability of the solution. So yeah, these are just like the few ways I think that friction can be managed. Thank you.
Thanks, Rita. And I think I'd add to that, I mean, looking up the psychology of change, I mean, there are whole models on the psychology of change, how people respond to change, what are the predictable things and how people respond, and understanding actually where each person or each key stakeholder is in terms of that change model. Are they in denial? Are they angry about it? Are they, do they feel particularly down because something has changed? Where are they? Understanding and meeting people where they're at. So, Amanda, coming back to you to build on Rita's point. Rita talked about, obviously, that brilliant part when actually users say, this is great, actually, it's made a real difference, but how can we use system design and process flows rather than just relying on policies to enable that to happen, so that, whatever we're putting in for the employee is the easiest and most efficient course of action? How do we achieve that?
Yeah, really great point. And I loved hearing what Rita was saying, because it really rang true for me. It's ultimately about consulting people, consulting those users. So, participatory design in, security procedures and equipment, involving people in that process of the information that involves them or that affects them. Ultimately, if you don't involve people in the design of security procedures, they will find workarounds. That is human nature. They are going to do it. It's not usually malicious. They're usually just trying to find the easiest way of doing their job, the most efficient way. But ultimately, those workarounds create vulnerabilities for an organization in terms of resilience and cybersecurity. So some of the workarounds I've seen, for example, are, say if your procedures prevent you from sending a document externally outside office hours because that looks a bit suspicious, then people might be tempted to use another way, like their personal email And then you're creating vulnerabilities because that, that document that's being sent isn't protected by the organization. You can't control it. But they're doing it because, maybe they need to send that information in a hurry. So it's about consulting them, working with them, understanding what they need to do and trying to have that balance between security and usability. Other workarounds that I've seen essentially are things like having keys left next to a secure door with an alarm system. And the reason for this was because the alarm was too noisy, it was too loud, and they didn't want to disturb people who were sleeping in the vicinity. So again, good intentions, but what's the point of having their keys hanging up next to the alarm? You've got no security then. I've even seen people put chewing gum on speakers to silence alarms because the alarms were annoying. So then they're not getting those alarms. So it's all about that human factors design of the alarms, not having alarms sounding every few seconds, only using audible alerts when you really want somebody to react, pretty quickly. And I have also seen a really common one, actually, is use of personal electronic devices, PEDs, because employees perceive that the equipment that's provided by the organization is too clunky. It lacks usability. So they prefer their own devices. And again, if you're doing that, then as an organization, you can't control that. So I think we really do need to consider those human factors and that usability and the design of equipment and procedures.
Thanks, Amanda. Barry, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think so. We've got to remember that people are not doing their job to do our cybersecurity functions. That's not why they're rocked up in the morning. Unless you're part of a cybersecurity company, of course, then that is your day job. But for us, everybody else, we need to have that as thin a layer from a usability perspective as possible. Because the more interruption that we have, then the chances are you're going to hit, like what Amanda highlighted, you're going to do some sort of workaround. Not because you're a vicious person, not because you're a threat actor or anything like that. It's just you want to do your day job. You want to do a good job. So the first bits that we try and get into when we're looking at product design is to actually understand what everybody's role is, understand what everybody's task is. So we try and do what we call the task analysis, which is getting to the full breadth and depth of what our users are expecting to get up to. And then what we need to do is then understand what are the consequences of that? What are the potential points where we could have a cybersecurity threat? Now, it's easy to think of saying, well, are we talking about threat actors? Are we talking about people maliciously coming into our system and trying to break it in some way? And yes, that's kind of why we exist. But 2/3 of those mistakes, 2/3 of those vulnerabilities are by people just trying to do their job. So we need to be able to make sure that we try and make their life as easy as possible. But then when we look at it from the threat actor perspective, we've got to look at making sure that we understand them vulnerabilities and the consequences of things going wrong. So when we come and do that analysis, you can then do basically risk analysis against how much protection do I need to put in place versus what's the consequences of people not being able to do their job properly.
Thanks, Barry. I mean, I think I'm going to come to you in a second, Joanna, about the economics of all this, because times are tough out there, and I don't know how many people here have had their budgets increased. How many people here are expecting to have their budgets increased next year, security spend budgets? Same as this year? Less? Hands up? Who's expecting their budgets to increase this year in the audience? 2 people. Who's expecting their budgets to stay the same as it was this year? Couple of people. Who's expecting their budget to be less? Okay, so times are tough in terms of money, and what I'm hearing is there's a lot of time and process and thought and design and rollout and phase rolls out, and that sounds expensive to me. How do we encourage the organization to be able to look at actually how some of these things will save us money in the long term if we look at these, if we look at different ways of doing it. If we look at basically what are the models that we can use in terms of putting in place to encourage the business to say, let's spend a bit more money on this because in the long term, it's going to save us.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of different models, but I think I can synthesize it to, and actually anything we do in life. And I'm an economist, so I think economics explains everything because I'm so arrogant. But it's about marginal cost, marginal benefit. Like everybody who's here decided to be here because the marginal benefit of being here is higher than the marginal cost and the opportunity cost of being here. So the formula is super easy. What, again, the beauty is in the details. So then when you think about, at the margin, cost benefit of any policy, anything you're doing, right? In terms of cyber, anything else. It's about identifying all of the costs and benefits. And that's already huge. Because that's what Amanda was saying. Think about the workarounds. That's a cost, right? That's what you were saying, about understanding the tasks, right? It's really about identifying everything that is weighed, in terms of cost and benefit. Then it's about quantifying, which, to me, famously, things that are easy to quantify are not terribly useful, and things that I really care about are very difficult to quantify. I don't know if that's your jobs. But I think, so there's a great work to be done there, identify, quantify. But then there's another thing that we don't talk about enough, to me, the time frame of it. When we're going to assess something, is it 1 year, 5 years, 20 years? Well, I don't know what's going to happen in 20 years even. But I think if the time frame is too short, then we're going to risk underestimate the beauty of prevention. If it's too long, we're going to have totally speculative benefits of something happening. And again, that's a conversation we should have. So I'm not really saying anything new, but it's so important to identify everything, not to miss anything. Quantify. I'm also quite a measures person in projects, including things like cyber power. I don't necessarily think everything should be measured, but when we do measure something, let's be responsible. Because once we have an indicator, somebody will end up maximizing or minimizing it, right? Like I will find that person. So like very responsible and very careful, identify, quantify, and then pick a time frame is my answer.
Brilliant. Good stuff. And by the way, we're going to come to you for questions in the last 10 minutes. So if you've got a question that you'd like to ask the panel, in about 9 minutes or so, we're going to open the floor up to all of you, hopefully. So moving on from, we've talked about what are some of the core problems. We've talked about, how we go about implementing some of this stuff. And now we're going to move to actionable strategies. So hopefully trying to make this a proactive panel session for you all. So Rita, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay. So we talked about, Joanna just talked about measurements and reporting in terms of measuring change. Implementing this people first philosophy requires a huge cultural shift. We talked earlier on about the need for there to be really good culture embedded, not only in the security function, but also in the wider organization. How do you measure that success? How do you do that in terms of cultural change beyond just looking at compliance metrics and things like that and reporting? What's your experience been of that internally?
Yeah, compliance is a huge one, and obviously you have to be compliant because you have to tick the boxes, right? But for security, secure culture change, or if you want to measure that, it's a journey. It's not something that is instant. So it requires a framework that progresses from compliance and then moves through behavior change and then a business impact, right? So from the behavior perspective, you can measure behaviors in the form of, for example, phishing emails, the number of phishing emails that were clicked, so click rates, but not just click rates. For you to be able to also understand if your philosophy is actually working within an organization, you also want to measure things like reporting. For example, they can not click the phishing links, but are they actually reporting it? Because reporting it is another step, is another level to know that, right, it's actually becoming part of the culture of the organization. Another thing you also want to check is the number of incidents that has human factors on them, right? So if you measure behavior, you can also measure things like pace of the security culture change, how quickly are people reporting these incidents? And then what is the time it takes for incidents, security incidents to be resolved? When you're able to measure all of this, then you can now align it to your key performance indicators like business impact, for example. How much money are we saving because of all of this behavior change? Or how are things better from a security perspective from an organization? And I think when you do all of that math, like so Joanna rightly said, if you're able to quantify all of those, then it is pretty clear where the cost benefits or economic benefits come from for an organization. Thank you.
And Rita, just staying with you just very quickly, can you speak to where you've seen that made a real significant difference within your own organization when you've done that?
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, measuring it can be quite laborious, but there are solutions out there. I think there's CyberSafe, there's different frameworks. There's one from SANS, there's one from NIST as well. So if you do that holistically, and then when you report up to C-suite level, you can easily marry that to the numbers to say, for example, this is what the budget we had this year, but the budget has dropped this year, and we can say, yeah, thanks to the security culture change we have in the organization. I think if you're able to track your security maturity model gradually, you can either do that quarterly or annually in terms of percentage. It's really easy to trace it back to the numbers.
Yeah, thanks, Rita. Amanda, I'm going to come to you, just talking about non-training interventions. What's the most effective behavioral changing intervention or initiative that you've seen an organization implement where it's made a real difference in terms of this? And can you talk a little bit also in the context of advanced technology or emerging technology that we're seeing more of and how that comes into play?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think I hear a lot of talk about changing behaviour, and I would say, as a human factors professional, we need to focus on changing the organisation, if you like, the procedures, the equipment in the organisation, those routes to so-called human error, because, I think, we need to get away from kind of blaming people. And it's also pretty hard to change behaviour as well. It's a lot easier to change the organisation. So I think definitely the key is, as we discussed really, is about consulting people about the procedures and equipment that they have to use, enabling them to be able to report incidents, when they need to. And I think, in terms of technology, so say you have in, say, the Security Operations Centre, emerging tech could be like using AI to help spot anomalies, to spot when secure incidents, could be happening, when there are phishing attacks and so on. So it's using human factors to design that interaction between, say, an autonomous agent or the information presented by the AI in a way that a person can interpret, working with those alarms. So we're not having people silencing alarms. I think other tech could be, my big bugbear, the huge vulnerability is passwords, right? So we all have so many passwords in our personal, professional lives that we just can't remember them. And with high-tech computing, it's pretty easy to guess passwords now, right? Apologies if it makes anyone feel uncomfortable, but you essentially often start with a capital letter, right? Then you get 4 numerical digits, because that represents a date. Then you get, an event that means something to that person, an anniversary, a football game or something. And then you end with an exclamation mark. So this is, these are very common password formats, if you like. And they are, of course, it's because it's hard for us to remember them. And it's that human nature. So if we can use technology like biometrics, facial recognition, fingerprint recognition, more of that, hard devices like, YubiKeys, as alternatives to that reliance on the human, if you like, I think that would definitely get my recommendation.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, we were talking in the green room earlier about obviously emerging and a lot of instances where people have already been using machine learning for a long time and obviously the greater adoption of AI and things like that. But some of the things we've been talking about today on the panel, where we're talking about being able to communicate really well with the organization, we talked about digital empathy, we've talked about good moral judgment, we've talked about ethics, we've talked about influencing. These are all things that basically we are going to still need to be able to do, even with the emergence of this amazing technology that is only going one way. So, Barry, I just wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about that, because I think there's still that perception, isn't there, that actually the software vendors, the solution developers, this should be they should be more responsible for a lot of this. And yes, okay, there's a lot of work that can still be done. But what's your view on that kind of balance between how much reliance we're still putting on technology to make us safer effectively, and how much is still always going to be in the domain of us humans?
I mean, this is what's terrifying to a certain extent, is that we are racing forward into the world of AI, and we hear about human-machine teaming and all this sort of stuff. But actually, most of our organizations can't still get the basics right. If we're going to be going forward into having good cybersecurity, then we really need to have all the organizations bought into what we're doing, and really getting that foundational level of leadership drive through the organization. I mean, just to lean into what you were saying around having the right metrics in place, I'm actually a great believer in, if we are leaning on the metrics of reporting, it's kind of already too late. We should have had all this stuff built in really early doors, because if we are relying on saying, yes, we've had this number of near misses, then what about the stuff that we haven't actually hit? We're spending a lot of time reporting when we could have nailed it fairly early on. So when we look at the future technologies going forward, we need to make sure that we lean into still keeping these basics right, making sure that we have that organizational leadership, because the fundamental thing with any system that you build, and I'm involved in quite a wide range of defense systems as well as things like smart towns, all the way through that spectrum, is it's all about people. If you take people out of the equation, the system doesn't need to exist. There's absolutely no point in having it in the first place. So, and I can see some of the software engineers in the room going, heathen. But it's kind of true, because all these systems exist for humans to interact with them. And the other idea is about cyber threat, because when we think about cyber threat, we think it's the computer in the room, we think it's the black box on the desk that's out to get us. Well, it's not. It's somebody else. It's another threat actor. It could be a state-sponsored actor. It could be somebody in their bedroom trying to have a bit of fun, messing about, seeing what they can do. But it's all humans at the other end of it as well. So it's cyber crime. It's people trying to do nasty things to you. And so we need to keep that in the back of our mind. No matter how complex the system gets, it's people that are both sides of the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. Joanna, anything you want to add just to finish up in terms of the kind of measurements of it always comes back to money at the end of the day, really. And I hate to do it because I'm putting a lot of pressure on the money side of things and the economics. But I think that's the thing that, I see as a challenge, is that quite often within organizations, if you're in security, you're the subject matter expert in your organization in terms of what your organization looks like and how the security, posture is currently looked at, and how do we articulate that better within the business to be able to convince the business that some of these things are needed in a world where quite often that money or budget isn't given, and then when something happens, those people are immediately in the firing line, which is a lot of what we've seen, particularly this year. So
much.
What's your view really in terms of how can we help cybersecurity leaders and teams to be able to communicate this in a better way, but focusing on the subject that is at the heart of the business? And if you're working in a business who's there to make profit or there to protect its income streams, how do we convince other people in the business that the things that we've talked about is a good idea? I know you touched on some of them earlier, but anything else you want to add?
No, thank you. And I'm just going to go rogue for a second. I love Barry's point about humans on both sides of the equation, because sometimes I hear human-centric design, but all of this is human-made. Like, none of these are natural artifacts that we see around us. So I think we should keep that in mind. Just very quickly on that, because I'm very much looking forward to questions as well, I think, sometimes cybersecurity teams forget that these decisions in an organization do not happen in a vacuum, right? Any organization has so many different competing interests. And how do you put that measurement on the same scale, right? How do you measure the very diffuse benefits of people first and the very diffuse costs across so many things and quantify them and say, if we do this versus if we do that, or if we do something else, right? So I think it's really about making the information salient and normalizing it on the same scale that is key. But I'll stop now because I think we want to hear from the audience.
We're going to go to questions.
Yes.
We're going to come here to hear from some of you. Does anyone here have a question for the panel?
Don't be shy.
Oh, gentleman at the front. I think we're just good.
Just interested to hear where you think the biggest kind of return on investment would come in human factors and cybersecurity on the prevention, detection, and response side. Which of those three would kind of, if you were to invest, had £1 to invest, where would you choose to invest it?
Is that to everybody or anyone in particular?
If anyone has an opinion,
Anyone got an
yeah.
opinion?
I mean, since you mentioned human factors, I'm jumping right in. There is actually a fair bit of case studies, because the problem with this, it's a spend to save. And it's particularly when we look about usability, everybody goes, oh, usability, why would we want to get involved in usability upfront? Because I've got this piece of software and I've developed it, it's great. But if we, there's been a fair few case studies done now, and so it's out there, it's in the literature, it's evidenced that for every £1 you spend on good human factors, actually no matter what the system, but it's definitely cybersecurity, you save £100 down the line. And so that £100 saving comes from that missed event. So if you have good usability, which means that your end user is going to do the process properly, is going to do the procedure that they're supposed to do, ideally without even thinking about it. Going to what everybody said on the panel about not just the technological intervention, but the learning, make sure it's embedded, it's well led. Then that means that you're saving basically 100 times the cost down the line of a software ransom, of your loss of data and things like that. So this is where I think it makes it quite uncomfortable, because you're turning around to the leadership team and saying, I need you to spend up front. And it kind of leads into what I was mentioning before around the metrics. The metrics are almost too late at that point, because if we've done that spending, then we actually save, and it's almost, you'll see, that's when you get the attitudes of, well, why did I need to spend so much money? Because nothing's happened. And that's a great thing. Nothing's happened, so win. So from my perspective, it's 100 to 1 saving.
Thanks, Barry. Any other questions? You've all come here today to hear something. If we haven't covered it, now is your chance to ask. Is there something that you want to... Okay.
I wanted to ask Joanna how you go about quantifying that kind of risk to reward kind of ratio you said. Like, how do you kind of predict how much a breach would be and how much like you want to spend, and how you would like explain that to, I don't know, a CISO or something like that?
No, sure. And I think the practitioners in the room might have like a more kind of implementable answer for you. Typically in economics, you would play on expected values, right? So what is the expected value of you investing in something? And then the expected benefit is the loss you're avoiding, right? And then what's the probability of the loss? And then what is the damage to you? And those costs, right? That's not just a loss of operations and reputation and morale and such. So make sure you quantify all of those costs. But I really like your question, because so in economics, we can classify goods according to many ways of classification. And one is, how can you assess quality of something, right? So there are search goods. So I can say this is nice quality without even consuming it before buying it. There are experience goods. So this is your theater play or restaurant. I can only assess quality after consuming, after buying. And there are credence goods. Like, I bought it, I consumed it, I don't know if it's good quality or low quality. Like vitamins, are they helping? Was this the best legal advice? Is this the best financial advisor? Cybersecurity is kind of like that, right? I mean, is it working? Some of the best attacks go undetected, right? So I think that's one of the big problems in quantifying these things, because cybersecurity has this credence element. So as an academic, I don't answer things, I just give you more questions. But maybe anybody wants to answer a more practical take on how they explain it to the CEO. Nobody wants to explain it to the CEO.
No. I would just add that the way we talk today sounds like the only challenge that is going to go up to the leadership team is how do you pay for cybersecurity? We've got to remember that we're in a very noisy room. The project management wants more money, human factors professionals want more money, cyber wants more money. Everybody else is clamoring at the board. And so the challenge that we face is not only being able to implement what we do, but actually to be able to give that message in a way that stands up across everyone else, because we are a transversal, we work right across that business. And so how do we make that message stick? We don't necessarily need to have to outdo everybody, but it's how do we make sure we have equal weight and in our argument. And I think that changes from business to business to business.
So in terms of quantifying, I can share my opinion. And I think one of the good ways to quantify is benchmarking. You need to understand where you are exactly and understand where you want to get to. So if you're coming from a vulnerability perspective, you could say, for example, we have 100 vulnerabilities and we want to get to a certain place. You know where you are, you know what your goal is. The next thing is, what actions do you take? And then as you take those actions, you can measure the trend. Are the vulnerabilities reducing? Are they increasing? Are new ones cropping up? But you need to have a benchmark. You need to be able to start from somewhere. And then I think gradually you'll be able to understand. You have a view of what the numbers look like.
I like benchmarking and just say, our competition is doing this. Exactly. We should also do this, right?
And saying our competition is doing this is no faster way to get the attention of people on the board. I would add to that, I think, understanding where the organization is. Where is it in the cycle? How is it doing? Is it performing well? Isn't it performing well? Which quarter is it in? Which other parts of the business are asking for things at the moment? Asking, like you said, in a silo or a vacuum, really. We're not just, asking at particular times. So the more you can understand about the context of the wider organization when you're asking, the better the quality of your asking. However, it's always still your responsibility to ask for the things that the organization needs. It's the board's responsibility to determine whether or not they do that or not. So let's not shy away from asking for the things that we need, but let's put it in a way that can really help us get the things that we need to enhance both the human experience and obviously technology and the protection of the business. So I think we're to time. A huge thank you. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you to Amanda on screen, and to Rita, to Barry, to Joanna. Thank you to all of you for coming to the session. Really hope you found it useful. If you haven't and you've got still more questions, you didn't want to ask them, you can find probably all of us on LinkedIn, I expect, or we'll be around for the rest of the day. But thanks very much for coming and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.